because without his support and belief in me, none of the books would have happened. So, well, it's very true. I mean, there were dark days when I was trying to write, and I remember at one point we were living in London, money began to get tight, and I was trying to write, and I said to Chris, should I just go get a job? And he said, no, you need to keep trying. The other dark time happened, and this is to embarrass the children. I belong to the Romantic Novelists Association, and they have a new writers scheme, and there's a deadline. Every year you have to submit a new novel, and the deadline's the end of August. And unfortunately for my children, we had 2 good weeks that summer. I was working to deadline. They didn't get out of the house. Well, they could get into the garden and they could wander around the village, but they couldn't get much further. And at the end of that summer, we were sitting up at the south having dinner, and I said to them all, do you want me to stop, to give up? And Dominic, my engineer, looked at me and he said, no, I want you to be better at time management. So, One Cornish Summer. Despite the fact that poor Isaac is on the cover, it is set above Gillen Creek, basically above Carn, where the cottages are. It took me a long time to try and figure out where I could stick Godolphin House, because it's based on Godolphin. So I flattened the landscape a little. I had to figure out in history, because in the world I've created, we had Pengarrick, which is set where Bazane is, and I knew that historically you wouldn't have 2 great houses so close together, so how was I going to make this work? Because I didn't want to set the book anywhere else but there, because years ago I had read one of, I think it's Clara, C.C. Vivian's books about the Hellfire. It's an oral history, and she mentioned something that stayed in my mind, which was people used to see a cavalier walking down the road at Carn. So I wanted to write a ghost story. This isn't a ghost story, I wasn't allowed one. But I wanted it set there because of the atmosphere, and I wanted to touch the history of the Civil War in this area. So I decided it had been a monastery, because there had been a couple of monasteries here, none of them big or beautiful or anything else, but you know, you fudge history where you need to. But it legitimately allowed me to have another big estate close to another one, because Henry, when the dissolution came, gave it to a rival family, and you know, the rest is history, as they say. So rather than bore you rigid with all sorts of other stuff, I'm going to do 3 short snippets. The first one is the prologue, and my daughter is out of earshot. Right. Don't ever speak to any. Don't ever speak of this to anyone. He rolled over, and I saw who was under him. My body began to shake. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words would not form as I watched her pull on her clothes. He remained in the bed with the sheet covering his nakedness. My brain wouldn't lose the image of what I had seen. It was stuck on repeat as he walked past me without a word or a glance. The last thing I saw was the friendship bracelet on her ankle. So, the book is about 2 women, an aunt and a niece, and Hebe, it's not a secret to reveal, is suffering early onset Alzheimer's. And the little snippet I'm about to read to you is when she goes in to see the consultant. She stood, straightened her dress. This wasn't going to be fun, even if she wanted to pretend otherwise. As she entered the room, the consultant was standing by the window. He turned and smiled. Was that a good sign? Take a seat. He came back to his desk, and she wished he would sit down, but he walked back to the window holding a clutch of papers. This wasn't okay. Some things had gone already, but her ability to read body language hadn't disappeared. Your test results showed a marked deterioration. Hebe pulled out her notebook and wrote down deterioration. I know this doesn't surprise you, since you mentioned you had felt it yourself. She nodded. We've spoken in the past about your plans as the disease progresses. She wrote down, disease progresses. What care arrangements do you have in place? Looking up at him, she frowned. Surely they were not at that stage yet. You never bring anyone with you, yet I recommended this right from our first appointment. I don't want to. He cleared his throat. Hebe, this shows clearly that your decision-making process is impaired and has been for some time. She flattened her lips. You will need help. She let the word sink in and wrote down, need help. If not today, then in the very near future. He came to the desk and sat down. Promise me you will bring someone to our next appointment. She nodded and continued to write down everything he said, but she wasn't thinking about it. She was thinking about Helwyn House. It was being auctioned in a few days' time. She would buy it. There were things she needed to do. Hebe, have you written down what I said? She looked down at her notebook. Buy Helwyn House. And Helwyn House is the name of Godolphin in the story. The second person in the book is Lucy, Hebe's niece, and she calls Helwyn House Hell House, which it's known by locally, as in here. For a lot of reasons, it's not her favourite place. But this is a scene much before she knows that she's going to have to come back to Cornwall. Lucy has been caught out and finds herself, having been videoed, leaving the apartment with a married MP. She hesitated in the hallway, listening to her father's voice. Escape through the front door was impossible, and now the back door was blocked too. She would have to face the music sooner rather than later, which was her preferred option. Walking into the kitchen, she saw her mother step away from her father and put down the coffee cup. I thought you would have grown up by now. You've had enough time to do so. He was a fine one to talk. Clearly he'd seen the early news and come to discuss the situation. She stared at them both. They hadn't a clue, unable to see what their dysfunctional life looked like from the outside. Maybe she should have photographed it for them so they would have no choice. The phone rang and Kate answered it, walking out of the room as she spoke. Shaking his head, her father said, "And really, a Labour minister? What were you thinking? The best you can hope for at this moment is a war. Otherwise, I'd say you'd be top news item for days." He glanced back down at his paper and then turned the page. Lucy glared at him. No one deserved to die for her sexual misdemeanors. She wasn't that needy. In fact, she wasn't needy at all, which is why she had turned to a lover who offered only limited access. Her father seemed to work on the same premise, though occasionally he appeared in the middle of the family he had created. Pontificating was his speciality. Lucy had ceased answering back long ago. It was a waste of her breath.